Hello, welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. My name is Dileepa Wijewardena, better known as Dupes. In this podcast, we will explore the wonderful worlds created by the power of words, from life and technology to fiction and the future, through articles, stories, interviews, and more. If you like this episode, please take the time to subscribe to this podcast, as I would like to get to know you better. You can visit me at tales.dupes.ca for more. It's the year 1938, on the 12th of July, at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, somewhere near Ratnapura, Ceylon. My grandfather and I crouched, deafened, speechless, and frozen. Mr. Mendis's manservant was kneeling in tears some distance away near Mr. Mendis's motionless leg, which was the only part of him sticking out from where the charred, smoking car bonnet had landed with indignant fury. So how did we get here, crouched by the side of the railroad and an exploded car? We'd have to go back a couple of hours for that. "Boy, Lamia, go wake your grandfather." I rubbed my eyes and I cleared my fuzzy vision. "Boy, Lamia, no time to wait. Stop standing there." Mr. Mendis's servant stood in the doorway shouting at me, his face flecked with sweat. Behind him, at the bottom of the steps leading to the small porch, was the crumpled form of Mr. Mendis himself. I figured this wasn't the time to argue about the man letting in more mosquitoes. Within minutes, my grandfather was standing over the prone Mr. Mendis after having pulled him in from the damp jungle night. "Solomon, take me to the hospital," Mr. Mendis gestured to my grandfather. "But Mr. Mendis, Mahathir, this isn't the time of the night to be driving." My grandfather's white moustache bobbed up, down, and side to side in ways I knew meant he was quite anxious. I had preemptively fetched everyone some sweet coconut water. "Solomon, I ate something bad. My stomach hurts. I don't want to wait for the morning. I must see the doctor now." "Ayo, Mr. Mendis Mahathir, I don't think you will die." My grandfather again shook his head. "Drink some of the tambili the boy has brought you. I'll get you some honey. You stay the night. I'll take you in just a few hours. First light." "Solomon, I loaned you the money to get that car. You take me now. You hear me?" My grandfather knew when he was beaten. He set his shoulders and turned Mr. Mendis's rage on me and his man. "Help get Mr. Mendis into the back of the car. Go now, Janne." I stood in front of the car, trying to keep from being blinded by the headlights. My hands on the crankshaft, waiting for my grandfather's imperious signal to put my back into the crank and start the engine. I gave the servant a smug wink when only 2 attempts later, the Wolseley 1460 purred. With Mr. Mendis and his man in the back, I jumped in front next to my grandfather. The roads in this part of Old Ceylon could barely be called such. On a moonless monsoon night, this so-called road was barely fit for an ox cart. Ignoring Mr. Mendis's groans, we attended to our tasks in silence. My grandfather struggled to keep the steering wheel straight, and I leaned out the window looking to catch a surprised elephant or a dumb buffalo on the path. From the village road, we turned onto the main road that crossed the railway. As the front wheels of the car cleared the iron rails, the engine spluttered a magnificent put-put and stalled. My grandfather turned to me. "Son, get out and crank the engine." I pulled the crank and gave it my all. And again, and again, and again, again! Sweat was pouring down my arms when the constant jungle sounds, my grandfather's shouts, and the metal on metal of the crank yielded to a rumbling and creaking that I could feel in the rails under me. "The night mail train!" My panicked grandfather jumped out, waving his hands at the servant. You get Mr. Mendis to safety, now!" And then to me, "Help me push the car or we are done for." The thunder grew louder, the whistling steam train approached, and then the iron monster turned the corner. I remember my grandfather grabbing me. I remember him dragging me. I remember him hugging me to the ground. I remember him shielding me as my eardrums burst. We crouched together, praying to every deity as we watched a silent rainfall of metal, rubber, and soot. You just listened to an original short story I wrote called Saving Mr. Mendis. You can read the full story for yourself at tales.dupes.ca. While I never really grew up in Sri Lanka, my late father was a born storyteller. There were very few occasions when he would not hold forth with some story or other. This was especially the case when he had been drinking, or if we were in the back of the 1950s Wolseley on our way somewhere during one of our many holidays in Sri Lanka. Saving Mr. Mendes is a short story inspired by many of the tales and written in the style that he would have used to tell such a story. Sri Lanka, like the world over, is a country that has seen massive change over the 20th century and into this one. What was once a British colony called Ceylon in 1900 would end the century as an independent nation called Sri Lanka. Over that time, it endured a civil war, many bouts of ethnic and sectarian violence, massive growth in both population and wealth inequality, as well as incredible urbanization. Aside from its politics and economics, the country brought forth writers of world renown, including Michael Ondaatje, Ramesh Gunasekara, Shyam Selvadurai, and more recently, Shehan Karunatilaka. It is a country of contrast, with several millennia of recorded history, both written and archaeological. I have many stories of Sri Lanka. The country might not have been my quote-unquote home, but our visits, the extended family, and the many stories have always been central to my life. The stories my father told and the experience we lived through are deeply intertwined. To give you an idea, let me take you through one of my journeys in Sri Lanka that also has a strong connection to my father, a pilgrimage in the summer of 1988 when I was just 13. This is not a Sri Lanka you will find anymore, but I hope I can convey some of what I remember of the smells, sights, and sounds. On a typically hot, sweltering Colombo day in the summer of 1988, we boarded a bus at the Colombo Fort Central bus station. In those days, the Fort Central bus station was a hype of activity with sellers of pineapple snacks laden with chili and the clinking bottles of Fanta and Elephant House cream soda. The bus we boarded was of a type that can still be seen in modern-day Sri Lanka if you keep a close lookout. It's a testament to its Indian engineering and Sri Lankan perseverance. These red, rectangular, aluminium-sided buses had no creature comforts, and like a metal monster come to life, rattled, growled, and whistled with every intersection. My mother, father, and I were heading on a pilgrimage to the holy city of Katragama. We had just arrived back in Sri Lanka after an absence of many years. Katragama was my father's favorite, most sacred place in all the world, he would say. Unlike many of the trips we had undertaken, we had decided to do this one by public bus. I can't remember the exact circumstances. However, this was at the very height of Sri Lanka's troubles. In the north of the country, the Liberational Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or the LTTE, were waging a guerrilla war of separation, and in the south, a Marxist insurgency was ongoing. In the end, the war in the north would take another 20 years and tens of thousands of lives before coming to an end. Checkpoints and barricades were common. Scowling armed forces watched for any aberration. This was not a time to show my poor Sinhalese and bring unwarranted attention. This crowded bus had little room to even stretch an arm, even if you were seated. We traveled south along the famous Galle Road out of Colombo. Back then, the second busiest road in the country, which meandered next to the sandy beaches and lagoon-filled coastline of western Sri Lanka. The beaches were empty of tourists for the most part, frightened by the violence. On occasion, salt-encrusted ocean humidity would waft in past the sweaty passengers. Had we been in a car, my father would have regaled us with stories. My father had a deep fascination with histories. The history of the people, the history of the land, the history even of a specific rock or tree. Here, the Portuguese would have landed and traded. Here was the town named Kadua, which means sword, that became Hikkadua due to some hiccups. I'm sure he was joking. Here was where he stayed as a student in the 1950s. And he would ask my mum if she remembered that trip in the 1960s and wonder how there could be so many houses. Often there were exclamations at what various politicians had quote-unquote done to ruin this beautiful land. He would sigh at how people had used the limestone from coral reefs to grind into the white paint used on the mud brick houses and allowed the angry sea to encroach unmolested and ravenous over the land. This trip was quiet, marked by the ebb and flow of the growling engine, my arm getting tired from holding onto a railing to prevent being unceremoniously disembarked by the jerking movements. With a number of bus changes taking the entire day, we passed along the famous Portuguese forts of Galle and Matra, and then inland into the dry-aired countryside of Tisamaharama and Katragama. These are holy places for Buddhists and Hindus. Buddha was supposed to have visited both places after he had attained enlightenment. Kings of Sri Lanka started their wars of conquering and reconquering the island several times from these southern cities. Kataragama was the home of Lord Murugan, Sri Lanka's only resident deity of the Hindu pantheon. Sitting astride a peacock, he had given his blessing to many battles. My dad would even claim that nearby hills featured in the famous epic Ramayana. On this trip, we eschewed the pleasures of an air-conditioned hotel for the very plain, white-walled, conspicuously clean, vegetarian, alcohol-free, and pilgrim-filled rest house at Kataragama. Under the stern gaze of my mother, there was to be no alcohol before the puja. Despite this, my father, the ever-extroverted doctor, had already become best friends with the receptionist and ensured we had the best room there. We quickly changed into new, clean, white clothes, my father in a white shirt and tan pants, and my mother in her customary pilgrim sari. My father was, as always, the colonial gentleman, his nice watch on display, a sparkling fountain pen in his coat, grey hair neatly styled with cream, his shirt neatly tucked in. This was not a place where you appeared unkempt to divinity. The holy city of Kataragama is reached by crossing the Manik Ganga, which literally translates as the Gem River. You can likely sift through those sands and find tiny sapphires. Ever sarcastic, my father would note that another new bridge had been built, as had been done by every leader since independence in 1948. Little had changed from the time of ancient kings, he said, when they littered the countryside with the equivalent of "I was here" monuments, meant to exalt them in reincarnation. The main area of Kataragama is a walled area with hut-like temples, the main one being dedicated to the god Kataragama or Murugan. At the appointed time, we all lined up amongst the grove of Bodhi trees, descendants, it was said, from the sapling brought to Sri Lanka after Buddha's death. Underneath the bell-like leaves, we held our puja offering high on our shoulders and above our heads. The bells started tolling and we moved along, pushed and pulled by the crowd. My father would hold my hand as he prayed for good fortune for my brothers and me under his breath. We walked inside. The ceremonies are designed to assail every sense. The colors, the sounds, the chanting, the clanging of the bells, and the clouds of incense. First came the offering of the murathang rice. It's a special sweet holy rice only ever produced for the meal times of the gods. The rice is first served to the god and then to the waiting flock. This was the start of the thrice daily ritual of feeding the immense appetites of the gods, with whom we now shared a meal. From here, we would hand over the puja basket, and the priest would take it behind a shimmering curtain adorned with a giant representation of the god Kataragama. A few minutes of chanting later, the tray would be returned, fruit cut in half. A portion of what we had offered, of course, had been taken, and we now had to share. Finally, one of the priests would put the sticky dot of the third eye on our foreheads before we exited into the cooling night. We would then walk with the masses to the famous millennia-old Buddhist stupa of the Kirivihera and sit on its still warmed ancient flagstones as the moon rose behind it. The next day, we boarded a bus from Kataragama to Badulla in the central highlands of Sri Lanka. The road to Badulla from Kataragama marked a grey dividing line of areas of control between the Sri Lankan army and the LTTE. To the east of this road was Yala National Park, and stories ran rampant of guerrillas hidden in the woods. Kataragama was safe. There was no way any party would ever commit a crime there. Outside that was a different story. This part of the trip was really for me. I had wanted to take the Podimanika train from Badulla to Colombo Fort. The train leaves Badulla in the afternoon and arrives in Colombo Fort Station in the nighttime. It winds through highland tea country and small villages populated by the tea plantation workers of the various major tea companies, Lipton, Cargill's, Macwood's. The train passes over old Georgian bridges, through innumerable black and smoky tunnels, and stops at every little well-kept one-room station. Smartly dressed station masters exchange message rings with train drivers to track the flow of traffic on the remote, one-track Highland line that seemed to have stepped right out of British colonial Ceylon. This is where the troubles of Sri Lanka come back into this story. The war rarely intruded on life in the Western Capital region, aside from suicide bombings. That year, the LTTE were ascendant. They were making forays into the highlands, and clashes with the Sri Lankan army had become common. The population of this area and the occupants of this particular carriage we were in were descendants of the Indian Tamil labourers brought over by British tea plantation owners. At one plantation station, several armed soldiers came on board. We were sitting by the window, my mum, my dad, and I. I had been paying little heed to the goings-on in the carriage until then. I had been staring out into the distance as I always do on train rides. These armed men with rifles, machine guns, and fatigues walked down the aisle, peering closely at each occupant. Finally, they came to my smartly dressed father and stopped short. One of the men said something in Tamil to my father. Without too much hesitation, and to my absolute surprise, my father, his hand firmly on my mum, responded in Tamil. The man stood there for a bit, gun slung across him, and after taking another long look at each of us, he motioned to the other men and left our carriage. At the next stop, the armed men disembarked. At the stop after that, the Sri Lankan army jumped on board and proceeded to identity check everyone on the train. Armed to the teeth, it was obvious they were looking for someone. The train pulled into Colombo Fort Station in the wee hours of the next morning, many hours later than expected. A day later, we heard the news. There had been a battle in a village in the highlands. A group of guerrillas had attacked a Sri Lankan army group. All this had happened not much after those first men had left our train, though I have no definitive proof of anything. I asked my father how he knew Tamil. In a carriage filled with local Tamils, we obviously stood out like a sore thumb. He said it was the right of anyone to be spoken to in the language that they wished. He had learned Tamil as a child and a student, and used it when he had worked in the north while working to eradicate tuberculosis in the 1950s. He respected the Tamil people greatly, so why should he not have answered back in Tamil? To this day, I do not know whether anything would have happened had he answered in Sinhalese or in English. It's a lesson, though, that I have never forgotten. Always learn the language. It is not just a courtesy, it is a solemn duty as a human to communicate with those around you in their own tongue. Besides, you never know when armed guerrillas might board your train. Thank you for listening to episode 13 of the Tales Under the Cat Tree podcast. I have some updates from previous episodes. In episode 9, when I went through our trip to James Bay in northern Quebec, I told my version of the story. Jen Arsenault, who was one of my companions on the trip, was inspired to write her version of that trip, and I will be putting that online at tales.dupes.ca, so watch for that. In last week's episode of The Case of the Disappearing Internet, I had a couple comments that I wanted to highlight. The first is that you should not forget about the archive that Google Groups holds for the old Usenet newsgroups. That came in from Colin Stockless. The second comment was from one of my friends, Lisa Lovelady. She noted that perhaps the ephemeral nature of the internet means that we get to be more measured and deliberate about what we choose to preserve. This is a viewpoint that I had not considered. This week also, I'd like to give thank you to my friends Ollie and Lisa for their feedback on the sound effects for Saving Mr. Mendes. It was immensely helpful. If you believe that this podcast or the writing I feature deserves to be seen by others, please do share. It would mean a lot to me and to the many friends who help me, listen to me, and will come on the show in the future. You can reach me through email, contact@dups.ca, bluesky@dupes.ca, or on my site and this post at tales.dupes.ca. The intro music is also composed by me. Remember to subscribe so I can get to know you better and learn from you. Give your pet a cuddle and your loved ones a hug till we meet again for some Tales Under the Cat Tree.